Jacob, you've always said that when it comes to Brexit, it's about the policy and not the person who's championing it. But the Prime Minister's given no sign or evidence whatsoever that she's for turning or for moving on this policy.
I think it's worth listening very carefully to what both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor are saying. That they're saying that they're rejecting Chequers because of the issue relating to the Irish border. But that if you can solve the Irish border, that must open up a Canada Plus deal.
But they've rejected that because they said that would lead to a border down the Irish Sea and it would separate off Ireland. So, I mean, how much longer, I suppose, is the question that you are going to stick with this?
But they're very careful in what they say. They're saying we won't have a Canada Plus deal or Super Canada deal because of the Irish question, but they're not focusing on negotiating the Irish question.
So when do they
that's what they need to do. Well, at some point they need to realise that nobody wants Chequers. The EU hasn't accepted Chequers, the Conservative Party, both left and right, hasn't accepted Chequers, and Labour said it'll vote against Chequers.
There are MPs who do accept Chequers and would accept Chequers over a no deal.
The MP for Maidenhead, and that's about it.
But what happens when she doesn't move? As I say, there's no real evidence. You may be able to point to little bits in speeches. If she doesn't move, when does she become the problem and not the policy?
The alternative that she has set out is that if people don't accept Chequers, we will leave without a deal. Leaving on world trade terms is not something that I'm frightened of. So I'm quite happy with that alternative that the Prime Minister is offering.
So you're happy for her to stay? You wouldn't rather somebody who is a full-blooded Brexiteer leading this?
Well, when we had the leadership campaign, I backed full-blooded Brexiteers. Full-blooded Brexiteers didn't win. So I'm backing the leader that the Conservative Party chose, that when you don't win an election, and the Remainers should remember this, you have to accept the result. And therefore I'm backing the Prime Minister.
But what about Boris Johnson? He's obviously setting out a platform for himself. Could you support him as Prime Minister or as leader of the party?
I hold a very high opinion of Boris Johnson. When you ask me the future question, I can refer you to the past, because I did support Boris Johnson for the leadership of the party in 2016. So I obviously thought then that he was of the right calibre to be Prime Minister.
And would you be better at leading these negotiations?
There is no vacancy. The Prime Minister is leading these negotiations, and I am supporting her.
You are famously a very courteous man, Jacob. Do you regret some of the language that you and your colleagues have used around Chequers? I mean, Chuck Chequers. It's the deadest of dead ducks. Boris has said it's deranged. I mean, you're smiling and laughing.
Well, I don't think it's unreasonable to be rude about policies. I think we're allowed to attack policies and say that they are bad, and that the deader a dead duck Chequers is, the better, because it isn't leaving the European Union. It's half in, half out. It's exactly what the Prime Minister said she didn't want in her Lancaster House speech. So I think objecting strongly to a bad policy is perfectly reasonable. What I think is best avoided are attacks on fellow Conservatives.
But Philip Hammond has described Boris Johnson, a man you said would be and could be good at Brexit negotiations if there were a vacancy, as someone who's incapable of dealing with grown-ups, has no grasp of detail.
Look, I've just said I don't want to attack individual Conservatives, so I'm not going to take a pot shot at Philip Hammond for what he said about somebody else. I do think that politics is best conducted when people don't attack individuals within their own party.
Right, but Boris Johnson has attacked the Prime Minister. I mean, in his article, his opus at the weekend, he said that the government was invertebrate and that the policy, admittedly, this is the policy and not her, is deranged. But you get the sense of what he means, that she's incapable of leading these negotiations because she's not a proper Brexiteer.
No, I think you're drawing an implication that isn't necessarily there.
He did say she's not a real Brexiteer. He supported Brexit, she supported Remain.
I think that is true. And I think if you look at not the most recent Andrew Marr interview, but the one before, the Prime Minister said that the country had voted with its heart and she had to sort out the more head aspect of it. And that was a very worrying comment because, in my view, Brexit is an enormous opportunity economically. It's something that one should support with one's head as well as heart. So yes, I think that's a valid criticism of the genesis of the policy that the government is following. But I don't think that is an attack on the Prime Minister personally. It's an attack on the policy that she's following.
People will see this as a mask for attacking the Prime Minister. However politely you put it, you are attacking the Prime Minister. You don't think she's capable of leading these negotiations. Why don't you say so?
Well, I think she is capable of leading these negotiations.
Not in the way you want.
I think that Chequers is a mistake. But I think what the Prime Minister said at Lancaster House, for example, what was in the Conservative Party manifesto, which people voted on, is perfectly reasonable and has my support.
Do you feel guilty about breaking open this party, as many of your colleagues colleagues have seen it. I mean, there are people here who say you and your colleagues in the European Research Group are splitting this party wide open.
I think that's a highly selective understanding of how the Conservative Party is operating, that we are simply committed to supporting the Prime Minister delivering what she promised in the general election manifesto. And it's very important people stick to their manifestos. The people who voted against the government in the withdrawal bill as it went through its stages in the House of Commons were not members of the European Research Group. They were people who didn't want us to leave the European Union and are still within the Conservative Party. And I think it's important to remember that we have not voted against the government once so far, but we will vote against the government if it doesn't deliver on its manifesto commitments. That's quite proper because our voters instructed us to support the manifesto that the Conservatives put forward.
What about your voters that were polled at the weekend by Politico, a majority of Tory voters who say they would rather Tory MPs backed the Chequers plan than no deal?
We had a vote to leave the European Union, and you've got considerable polling saying that the Chequers plan has virtually no support at all.
This is a recent polling.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're saying that you've got to do what voters want, Jacob, then
we're
these
doing
are
what voters wanted.
Tory voters.
17.4 million votes is rather more significant than a poll by an obscure online site.